What's up, you sweaty nerds and greasy degenerates? Kafka is right around the corner, only a couple of days away or so, and Dan Heng in Imbibitor Lunae comes out right after that. So, a lot of people are on the fence. Should I pull for Kafka? Do I like DOT teams? Or should I pull for Dan Heng in Imbibitor Lunae, a hypercarry DPS? So, let's go ahead and talk about it to see who you may want to pull for or not. Or hey, should you just keep skipping and see what comes in the future? So we're going to briefly go over their kits so that we know if we want to pull for them or not. I do summarize everything at the end of the video, so if that's all you're here for, go ahead and skip to the end. I'll leave a timestamp for it. I decided to talk about Dan Heng in Imbibitor Lunae first, not just because he's hot, but because a lot of people, myself included, have been talking about Kafka, who's also hot, but you might want a little bit of a refresher for what Dan Heng in Imbibitor Lunae does, because although we did get to play him a little bit in the story quest, if you've already finished it, you might not really fully remember what he does in combat, so I decided we'd give a little bit of a refresher for what he does in combat. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Dan Heng in Imbibitor Lunae is hung like a tree and wants to paint the inside of your walls with hold up, those are the wrong notes. One moment, please. Yeah, here we go. My bad. Okay, Dan Heng in Imbibitor Lunae has a very unique skill in the game. Basically, what Dan Heng wants to do is use his basic attack all the time, because he can enhance his basic attack using his skill. And everywhere that I have read says that Dan Heng's skill does not consume skill points and is not considered a skill. So yes, that information is subject to change. Hoyoverse could last minute change his kit and completely throw everybody through a loop here, but everywhere that I've read so far, and it's been like this for a long time, says that Dan Heng's skill will not use skill points and basically allows him to enhance his basic attack in 3 different ways. So let's go ahead and talk about how he can enhance his basic attack in those 3 different ways, because it gives him 3 different basic attacks based on how you use those skills. Dan Heng in Imbibitor Lunae, I'm going to keep calling him Super Saiyan Dan for probably the rest of this video, because that's what I like to call him, and I'm sick and tired of calling him in Imbibitor Lunae by his full name, because there's 2 different versions. Hoyoverse, why do you do this to us? Anyways, Super Saiyan Dan has a 2-hit basic attack, and it's like everybody else's basic attack basically. It starts out at 50% and you can increase it all the way up to 100% with traces. Now let's get that out of the way and let's talk about how his enhanced basic attacks work, because he can use his skill, and if you use his skill 1 time, it gives him 1 ability, and if you enhance it 2 times, it gives him a different ability. You enhance it 3 times and it gives him that last ability. And it seems to me, based on everything that I've read, that his 1, his 2, and his 3 have different effects, but interestingly enough, it doesn't cost any skill points to do it, so a lot of people are probably just going to use his 3rd version, because from what I've read so far, his 3rd version is the best. But let's talk about the different versions that he has in order first. So, the first version of his basic attack that's enhanced, it unleashes a 3-hit attack that deals imaginary damage, and it's focused on 1 single target. So, and it is lower percentage, so I don't know why, but some people might want to use this potentially if they're trying to maybe not, completely defeat the enemy and might have something planned with a certain synchronization on their team, because I believe he also has an ability that allows him to cancel his enhancement as well, which I think is very, very interesting. If they're giving him an ability that lets him cancel it, I think that's great, because a lot of us usually, why don't we get a cancel for our ultimates, right? How many times have you accidentally hit your ultimate and you can't back out of it? I wish we could do that with our ultimate. Anyways, let's move on to his second enhancement, which unleashes a 5-hit attack dealing imaginary damage, and it's to a single target, but from the 4th hit onwards, it simultaneously hits the enemies adjacent to that target, so it'll end up hitting 3 enemies, but it's a decreased amount of damage by a lot. Like, the single target that you're aiming for is going to take a ton of damage, and the 2 on the side are just going to take a little bit of damage. But don't forget that if they're weak to imaginary for whatever reason, it's still going to deal a lot of shield damage, which is very, very, good to good for his kit. You know, that's a really good thing. Hitting more than one enemy at once, as everyone's seen from Blade, that's really strong. So let's move on to his last enhancement, his third enhancement, which unleashes a 7-hit attack, dealing imaginary damage, which is the highest percentage from his enhancements that he has, and it's to a single target, and from the 4th hit onward, it simultaneously hits the enemies on the sides adjacent to them. So this attack will also hit 3 enemies at once. And because this doesn't consume skill points, I don't see why most people wouldn't go for this third skill pretty much every single time, because even if you're going for one target, it's still going to deal like the most damage to that single target. So most people are probably going to use this third enhancement most of the time, because it also deals you know, more shield damage. It deals basically everything more damage. But every once in a while there could be a reason, I can't think of a great example right now, but I've had reasons in the past where I don't want an enemy defeated yet for a certain purpose. It's very rare, but you can, I think, cancel out of this if you do choose it, and switch to his first enhancement, which only hits a single target. So I think that's really important to note there. But again, most people are probably going to use his third enhancement like almost like 90% of the time. I don't even know why the second enhancement's really there, if it does pretty much the same thing just for less power, but something to consider there. And another thing to consider here is that his second enhancement and his third enhancement, you know, enhance basic attacks, both of them put a single stack of his ability on top of him that will gain him 12% crit damage. It can stack up to 4 times. So again, using his second enhancement and his third enhancement, each one seems to give him 1 stack of an ability that gives him 12% crit damage, and it stacks up to 4 times. I'll do a video in the future specifically for Super Saiyan Dan, you know, talking about this in more detail. For right now, I just want to give you guys a general idea of what he does in combat, so you know if you want to pull for Kafka or skip for Dan, or even, you know, potentially skip for something in the future like Fu Xuan or Lynx. But those are his basic attacks, and so let's move on to his talents now. And so from what I've read, his talent will give him another set of stacks that are different than the other stacks. These give 10% damage stacks, and they can stack up to 6 times, but it only lasts for the 1 turn that he's on, which is another reason why his third basic attack, so his third enhancement, is usually what most people are going to want to use, because if it only lasts till the end of the turn, and that third basic attack has more hits than the other ones, so he's going to end up getting more stacks of both of his abilities, the crit damage and the normal attack damage. So I would definitely lean towards using his third basic attack. Again, this information is subject to change, and a lot of people presume that he could end up getting nerfed last minute because his kit looks very strong right now. You know, we can't say whether he's better than Blade or Sela at this moment in time, but it's looking very strong, and so don't be surprised if he ends up getting a last minute nerf, so just be aware of that. And Super Saiyan Dan's ultimate is very similar to his third enhanced skill, where it deals a lot of damage spread out to more than one enemy, but it is focused in on one enemy from what I have read so far, but it spreads out the damage a bit better, so it's not dealing quite as much damage to that main target, and it deals more spread to the enemies adjacent to it, similar to an AoE. As far as Kafka is concerned, I do have dedicated videos specifically for Kafka. I'll put those in the description and a pinned comment down below if you're interested in that. But in short, Kafka is a DOT-based character. You build your entire team around her. Similarly to Silverwolf, DOT is damage over time, and it provides a different playstyle, and she elevates DOT teams to be at their fullest potential. So similar to Silverwolf, you want to build your whole team around her because she provides so much great utility that you want to build around what she provides. And so you want to have more than one DOT character on your team with her, and she uses her skill so that you're applying DOTs all the time with your other characters and her, but when she uses her skill, she'll detonate all those DOTs every single time she has her turn. So you want to use her skill basically every turn. She's going to be skill hungry, so you want characters that use the DOT and then can switch to their basic attack, and she'll detonate DOTs very, very often if you build her with some speed. You can also build her around attack percent so that you can get the most damage off the DOTs, but you can also build crit rate on her substats in order to build her for some attack as well. Don't forget break effect and a little tiny bit of effect hit rate in order to make sure that those DOTs are actually applying. But like I said, she's a character that you want to build your whole entire team around, and it brings a whole new play style to the game, so she's going to be relevant for a very long time because of that in the game. Similar to Silverwolf, where she's going to have a pretty decent longevity for the game for the foreseeable future. One day in the very, very far future, we're talking like a year or further down the road, and maybe she falls off, but to be honest, a lot of people predict that more DOT characters will arrive in the game, actually elevating her gameplay rather than, you know, kind of power creeping her gameplay, because she provides so much utility. Similar to a sub DPS character, she has a lot of damage, but she also kind of elevates the damage of your team overall. So, should you pull for one of these characters? Should you keep skipping? If you do pull for one of these characters, who should you pull for? Well, the decision's made a little bit easier because these are two completely different characters. And if you don't like what they do, you might just want to keep on skipping. So, let's go ahead and go into it. Dan Heng is a hypercarry DPS, right, on one end, and Kafka is a utility-based character based on what she's providing to a team. So, if you want to no-brain it, you can just throw Dan Heng onto any team, and the team's going to probably perform well just based off of his damage numbers. But if you are in a situation where you need two different teams, like in Memory of Chaos, for instance, and in Late Forgotten Hall, you need two different teams in order to play those stages. So if you already have a well-built-up, you know, main team, you could pick up Kafka and build an entire second team around her, and then boom, you have two teams right there. Or, if you have a second team you've already been building and all you need is that DPS slot filled by a good DPS, then you can put Dan Heng, or Super Saiyan Dan, into that slot and boom, you have two teams. So it really just depends on what you need for your account. But let's talk about how good these characters are really going to be. Kafka, like Silverwolf, is a very unique character to the game. Those two, Silverwolf and Kafka, are probably the only two characters that can elevate a team to really high potential just based on what they bring to the team themselves. But you do want to build around them. You know, Kafka's going to want DOT characters on your team, so if you don't want to build DOT characters, you might not want to pull for Kafka. And now, if you think these characters are hot, just pull for whoever you think is hottest, and like that's maybe all you might want to pull for, go for it. Don't let me stop you. But Dan Heng, on paper, is looking right now like he's going to be one of the best DPS characters in the game. I predicted that Blade would be a top 3 DPS, and he would change the tier lists. And I was actually surprised, because even though that was my prediction, he changed the tier lists a lot. And he ended up being the second best DPS in the game, just shy of Sela. And I believe we're going to have the same situation again. I think that Dan Heng, based on what we see so far, is going to be a top 3 DPS character in the game, right up there with Blade and Sela. And don't even think about Jing Yuan or none of those people. Based on what we see so far, Dan Heng is looking better than all the others, except for maybe Blade or Sela. So, something to consider there, especially because Dan Heng and Imbibitor Lunae is rivals with Blade. So it would make sense that they want to release Blade and Dan Heng around the same power level, maybe one slightly above the other because of lore or something. So just something to think about there. Dan Heng does look very, very powerful. But don't forget that Kafka also brings a lot to the table, like Silverwolf, and she can completely elevate the power level of an entire team. It's not Kafka's damage numbers that people really truly care about, it's like the overall damage for the whole team that she's going to be able to provide. She's going to unlock DOT playstyles. So just something to think about there when you are considering the character. What I basically just said between the two characters is probably the most important part of the video, but I wanted to talk about the different kits really quick beforehand so that you knew what you were getting into. And now, should you skip these characters and keep waiting? Well, Fu Xuan comes out after Dan Heng, and she is a damage mitigation based tank. She's also a quantum tank, and Lynx is also arriving in the same patch with Dan Heng and Fu Xuan. So if you're building for Mono Quantum, you didn't even need this video. You already know to save for Fu Xuan and for Lynx. But if you need a tank, then obviously this is a skip. You might want to skip for Fu Xuan, because she is looking to be a very solid tank, at least as of right now. And we also have some other characters coming down the line eventually, like Jing Liu. You know, you'd have to be crazy if you didn't already know that, because she had a companion quest and she was playable. So, you know, just something to think about that. You've already seen her kit in game. So, and she is also going to be a hypercarry DPS as well. So, you may want to skip for Jing Liu instead. But don't forget, Jing Liu is a little ways out. You have like a whole entire another patch and a half before she comes out probably. So just something to think about there. If you liked this video, leave a like and subscribe. If you hated this video, start a hate thread in the comments and I'll retaliate by stealing your cookies. Alright, see you next time. Peace out.